Ask someone why they're broke, and they'll usually blame a number. Not enough income. Bad luck. A market that never cooperated. Almost nobody blames the thing actually running the show, a brain that was never built for long-term financial security in the first place. This isn't a video about budgeting. It's not about spreadsheets, index funds, or the difference between a Roth and a traditional account. Plenty of broke people already understand all of that perfectly well, sometimes better than the people telling them what to do with their money. This is about the 5 psychological forces that override good financial knowledge before it ever gets a chance to work: dopamine, identity, status, lifestyle inflation, and instant gratification. Each one is backed by real research, and each one operates below the level most people ever consciously examine. By the end, you'll understand why staying broke has almost nothing to do with intelligence, and everything to do with wiring most people never chose and rarely question. The default explanation for financial struggle is character. Lazy. Undisciplined. Bad with money. That explanation is comforting for everyone who isn't struggling, because it implies the problem is a personal failing rather than something structural, and comforting for no one who is. It's also, according to decades of behavioral research, largely wrong. The people staying broke are frequently the same people who can recite the correct financial advice word for word. Knowing the right answer and being able to act on it under real psychological pressure turn out to be 2 almost entirely separate skills. Start with dopamine, because it explains something that trips up even disciplined people: the reward isn't in owning the thing. It's in wanting it. Researchers at Stanford put people in a brain scanner and watched what happened the moment they considered buying something. A region called the nucleus accumbens, packed with dopamine activity, lit up the instant a desirable product appeared on screen, well before any purchase was made. A separate region tied to pain and loss activated when the price felt too high. The actual decision to buy could be predicted from that tug-of-war seconds before the person consciously knew what they were going to do. Here's the part that matters for staying broke. The dopamine hit happens at the anticipation, not the acquisition. That's why the item often feels less exciting the moment it arrives than it did the moment you added it to the cart. The brain already collected its reward during the wanting. Everything after that is just paperwork. Modern spending is engineered around exactly this mechanism, often deliberately. One-click checkouts, saved card details, and buy now pay later plans all exist to shrink that insular-driven pain of paying signal down to almost nothing, so the anticipation reward fires without enough friction to interrupt it. A physical wallet, thick with cash that visibly gets thinner, generates far more of that pain signal than a stored card that gets tapped without a second thought. Companies didn't need to understand the neuroscience to exploit it. They just needed to notice that removing friction increased sales, and kept removing it. None of this makes anyone weak-willed. It makes them a person with a completely normal brain interacting with systems specifically engineered, often by people who do understand the neuroscience, to bypass it. Now add identity into the mix, because money decisions are rarely just financial. They're statements about who a person believes they are, made before the conscious mind gets a vote. Financial psychologists have spent years studying what they call money scripts, unconscious beliefs about money, typically formed in childhood, that quietly steer adult financial behavior for decades. Research using a validated inventory of these beliefs sorted people into a handful of recurring patterns. Some view money with outright anxiety and avoid dealing with it entirely. Some chase it as if enough of it will finally solve every other problem in their life. Some tie their entire sense of self-worth to their net worth, needing to out-earn or outspend the people around them just to feel stable. And some obsessively track every dollar out of a quiet, persistent fear that security could vanish overnight. None of these beliefs get chosen consciously. They get absorbed, usually from watching a parent panic over a bill, celebrate a bonus, or never once mention money at all. One of the researchers behind this field of study has traced his own interest in it back to a single relative, a grandfather who lived through the Great Depression, lost money when a bank failed, and never trusted a financial institution again for the rest of his life, keeping his savings anywhere but a bank for decades afterward. That single trauma became a belief. The belief became a decades-long habit. And the habit outlived the event that caused it by an entire lifetime, passed down to a family that never experienced the original loss firsthand. Decades later, the adult version of any of us isn't just spending or saving. We're performing an old script written by someone else, in a situation that no longer applies, without ever knowing the script exists. Status adds a second layer on top of identity, and it's older than modern psychology by about a century. In 1899, an economist named Thorstein Veblen described a category of purchase that breaks basic economic logic, goods that become more desirable specifically because they cost more, not despite it. Normally, demand falls as price rises. With these goods, the opposite happens, because the price itself is the product. He called it conspicuous consumption. The entire point isn't the object. It's making sure other people see you own it. This explains a pattern that looks irrational until you view it through a status lens. Two people with identical incomes. One drives a modest car and invests the difference, the other leases something flashier than they can comfortably afford. The second person isn't behaving stupidly. They're paying a premium for a signal, and the signal is doing exactly what it's designed to do. The problem is that the signal has to be renewed constantly. Status purchased today doesn't stay purchased. It has to be topped up again the moment somebody nearby buys something newer, which means the spending required to maintain the same relative position only ever moves in one direction. Lifestyle inflation is what happens when status-seeking and identity collide with a rising income, and it's backed by one of the most famous findings in happiness research. In 1978, psychologists compared people who had won the lottery to a matched group of people who hadn't, and to a separate group of people who'd been paralyzed in accidents. The lottery winners were not measurably happier than the control group. More strikingly, they reported taking noticeably less pleasure from small, ordinary moments, a cup of coffee, a conversation, a joke, than people who hadn't won anything at all. The theory researchers used to explain this is called the hedonic treadmill. Every gain resets the baseline almost immediately, and once the baseline resets, it takes something bigger than before to produce the same feeling. Apply that to income instead of lottery winnings, and the mechanism is identical. A raise feels incredible for a few weeks. Then the new spending it enabled becomes the new normal, and the excitement it was supposed to buy quietly disappears, leaving behind only the higher fixed costs. That's why lifestyle inflation is so difficult to notice while it's happening. Nothing about it feels reckless in the moment. Each individual upgrade feels earned, proportional, even responsible. A bigger apartment after a promotion isn't a red flag by itself. Neither is a nicer car, a few more nights out, a better vacation. It's only in hindsight, looking back at years of rising income sitting next to a savings rate that never moved, that the pattern becomes visible, and by then the higher spending has usually calcified into fixed, recurring costs that feel just as mandatory as rent. The last piece is instant gratification, and it comes with the most famous experiment in this entire field, along with a twist that rarely makes it into the popular version of the story. Starting in the 1960s, a researcher named Walter Miskell sat young children down in a bare room, one at a time, with a single marshmallow on a plate in front of them. He offered a simple deal: eat the one marshmallow now, or wait alone in that room for several minutes, with no distractions and no company, and receive two instead. Some children lasted seconds. Others found elaborate ways to distract themselves, singing, covering their eyes, turning their chairs around, anything to survive the wait. The children who managed to hold out, the original research suggested, went on to have better outcomes years later on measures ranging from test scores to weight, and the marshmallow test became shorthand for the idea that willpower alone determines financial and life success. Here's the twist. A large 2018 replication, using a bigger and more economically diverse sample, found that once researchers controlled for a child's family background and home environment, the predictive power of the marshmallow test shrank dramatically, in some analyses by roughly 2/3. Related research on the same task found something even more interesting. Children were far more willing to wait when they'd previously learned that adults in their environment actually kept their promises. Waiting isn't a fixed personality trait. It's a rational bet on whether the future reward is likely to actually show up. That reframes instant gratification entirely. Spending everything today instead of saving for a distant, uncertain future isn't necessarily a character flaw. Economists have their own name for a related pattern: hyperbolic discounting, the tendency to value a reward available right now far more than the math says it's actually worth, while treating a reward even a few months away as barely worth waiting for at all. For a lot of people, especially anyone whose early life involved financial instability, prioritizing the present isn't irrational. It's a learned, defensible response to a world that has repeatedly failed to reward patience. The math of delayed gratification only makes sense if you trust the delay will actually pay off, and plenty of people were never given a reason to trust that. Notice something about all 5 of these forces before moving on: none of them check a bank statement first. A surgeon earning $500,000 a year has the exact same nucleus accumbens as a line cook earning $30,000. A software engineer with a finance degree absorbed money scripts in childhood just like everyone else, and no amount of professional expertise automatically overwrites a belief installed before the age of 10. High earners get access to more expensive versions of every one of these traps, not immunity from them. That's the uncomfortable part of this entire subject. It explains just as much about why a doctor lives paycheck to paycheck as it does about anyone else. Put all 5 of these forces side by side, and staying broke stops looking like a discipline problem and starts looking like exactly what it is: 5 separate, well-documented psychological systems, each operating automatically, each evolved or learned for completely different reasons, all quietly pulling in the same direction at once. Nobody sits down and decides to sabotage their own future. The sabotage happens in the space before a decision even reaches conscious awareness, which is precisely why it survives every straightforward budgeting course, every spreadsheet, and every piece of good advice that assumes people are working from pure logic in the first place. Which means the fix isn't more willpower, and it was never going to be. Willpower is a limited, exhaustible resource that these 5 systems are specifically good at outlasting. The actual fix is redesigning the environment those systems operate in, so that good decisions require less willpower to begin with, and bad decisions require more effort to reach. Add friction back into spending on purpose. Delete the saved card. Log out instead of staying signed in. Let a cart sit for 24 hours before checkout. If a purchase still feels worth it the next day, it probably is. If the urge fades, the dopamine hit already did its job during the wanting, and the 24 hours just saved you the money. Get curious about your own money scripts instead of assuming your habits are simply how you are. Ask where a specific belief about money actually came from. Most people can trace at least one financial habit straight back to a single moment in childhood, once they actually look for it. Separate status purchases from value purchases, on purpose, out loud. Neither one is wrong. But a $30,000 car and a $15,000 car that both get you to work are not the same financial decision wearing two different price tags, and only one of them is pretending to be about transportation. Build a rule for every future raise before it arrives. Decide today, in advance, what percentage of any future income increase is allowed to upgrade your lifestyle, and automate the rest into savings before the hedonic treadmill gets a vote. And make long-term saving automatic rather than a decision that has to be remade willingly every single month. The version of you deciding whether to transfer money into savings on a random Tuesday is competing against dopamine, identity, status, and 40,000 years of evolutionary wiring. Automation removes the vote entirely, and simply does the healthy thing by default. And if patience feels genuinely hard to summon, don't treat that as a personal failing to white-knuckle through. Rebuild trust in the delay itself, in small, verifiable steps. Automate a tiny amount first, watch it actually still be there in a month, and let that small proof of reliability do the persuading that willpower alone never could. None of this means the 5 forces disappear. They don't. They're permanent features of being human, not flaws in your particular character. But a system that's designed with them in mind, instead of against them, stops requiring a fight you were never going to consistently win in the moment. Staying broke was never really about not knowing what to do. Almost everyone already knows they should spend less and save more. The real question was always why, knowing that has never been enough on its own, in the moment it actually mattered. Now you know exactly why. 5 well-documented systems, none of them chosen, all of them older than any budgeting app ever built to compete with them. Understanding that isn't an excuse. It's the first tool anyone's ever handed you that's actually built for the fight you're really in.